Ahmad, head of the department, and faculty members and staff members. I welcome you all for this IIC Impact Lecturer Series webinar. So now the session handed over to Professor John. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you, sir, uh, for inviting me for this wonderful session, sir. I would like to thank the Institution Innovation Council, the chief patron, the principal, sir, the organizing patron, Ashok, sir, for inviting me and letting me be a part of this wonderful event. I will just share my presentation. Is my presentation visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Visible, sir.
Okay, sir. This session we will discuss about design thinking and critical thinking. And once again, I would like to formally thank again Danish Ahmed Institute of Technology and the entire organizing team for organizing this kind of a wonderful program. Um, just to formally introduce myself, so my name is John Amos. I'm an assistant professor, senior grade here in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at KPR Institute of Engineering and Technology. So design thinking and aspects of innovation, all we work very closely because we also coordinate with career development cells, career advancement cells, and opportunities abroad as well. So this is a wonderful topic to talk about, a wonderful uh, an innovation to actually think about. So this is kind of restructuring the way we think. And if my understanding is correct, I believe most of the participants are students and there are a few faculty members as well. So the way I've structured the talk is to understand, to get a feel of what design thinking is and critical thinking from a point that we can relate. Because design thinking in itself, if you just to understand the process, is not very tough in itself. A lot of effort has been put into structuring what design thinking is. But once it is done, to just look at it and to observe or to study as a question, it is not a very complicated process. But from our perspective, from a student sitting here at this particular event, I want each student to see how we can actually relate to these topics, see how we can actually try and restructure the way of thinking, and also understand that this is not something that has happened in isolation. That some innovation has come up. This is a new trending topic, and that people before this have not worked into earlier versions of it. So I will try and explain, or put an end to that myth as well. So the um, uh, first point that I'm trying to make when I is when as for example, when a faculty comes into your class, right? Uh, for example, he says a statement. So I will go with a very traditional statement just so that we understand what is actually happening in our mind, and then we'll try and move into what particularly design thinking is, right? So a faculty, for example, the second hour of the class, he just walked into your class. He says the sky is the limit, right? So when you listen to a statement like that, what do you think the students are thinking of? Most probably the students are not did not even pay attention, right? Or most probably they were like, okay, the sky is the limit, right? So there's nothing more to that. That there is nothing much for him to think. he understood what the sir has said, right? And that is it. And maybe there are students who are like, okay, maybe when we walk out in the evening, this is what we have seen, so that is what he is talking about, right? Maximum, this is what can happen, right? But in case the same statement, right? So this is a very, very, what do I say, a very commonly used example. But to drive the point that I'm trying to make, I think this is a wonderful example to quote here as well. So the faculty has come, sky is the limit is a statement he has made. This is the thought on every student. Now he has restructured it in such a way saying, asking, is sky the limit? Right. So now it becomes a question. So every student now has to think. Now is starting to think. Isn't sky the limit? Right. That is what I have heard. Right. Or we are looking at other possibilities as to what what you saw yesterday evening in the sky, right? Or what you have read about, or what you have seen on TV, right? Or if you're following different movies, right? You have seen things happening outer space. So these are possibly one of the few images that is coming to your mind. So you see a person in a spacesuit, he's out in outer space, the space exploration happening. There are organizations sending rockets to space, sending people to space to make different observations. So you could relate to some of these events, or maybe you're looking at Elon Musk himself, right? With all the innovations that is happening. When I say is sky the limit, the first person that you think of possibly is Elon Musk, and then you understand what you, because you are interested in that area, you think of SpaceX and different areas and different innovations they have done in that area, or maybe this control room setting that you have seen in different movies, or maybe the ISRO control setting room itself, or the NASA center that you have seen again in different movies. If someone is fortunate to be there, or you have not seen anything at all, you have not read anything at all, you're watching movies, right? So this is from the scenes where you see again Shah Rukh Khan is at the NASA center here. So 60 students are going to think of 60 different things, right? 60 different thoughts that are going to come to mind, very simply because I have restructured that particular sentence. So I said, the sky is the limit. It closed all your thoughts. You did not think of a single thing. But when that was restructured into a question, is sky the limit? That is when the process of thinking has begun in your mind, right? So I would like to try and direct the students to look in this particular direction. So I'm trying to relate to a student sitting in a classroom, and then I want you to come from a point as to observing what your thoughts are, and then move on to what design thinking is, rather than understanding what design thinking is in a very broad way, right? So this is what is happening to you when a faculty walks into a class. Two different instances, two different, entirely different reactions, right? So, a question that I would like to pose to you now: what are you thinking right now? Right. So there has been a session before this. Some of you are maybe you have just logged out of that session. You're coming into this session, right? Or you decided to take a break. You're just logged in, and you're not maybe physically here, right? So there are different aspects. So depending on wherever you are disturbing, depending on the disturbances around as well, there could be different things that you're thinking right now, right? So there are two reactions that you could be giving to this particular presentation. One, you're open to what is being said at this particular presentation, or you are closed. So when I say you're closed, there is a possibility that you're thinking of something else and you're not focusing on this particular topic, right? So who decides? I mean, who decides? Can I to open or to close your thinking, right? So major responsibility lies with you, right? So it comes from how uh, how eager you were to actually sit through this particular session, and partially it comes from me as well. So like I said with the example above, every time I just make statements. If I just keep saying that this is what design thinking is, this is what he said, this is what she said, this is what this industry do, they're all statements, right? If I keep doing that, obviously I'm going to keep your mind closed. And if I had only restructured them into questions, I can actually try and open your mind and make you think about it. So a statement closes the mind, but a question opens the mind. This is a fundamental, very, very basic thing of what happens in education, in school education, up to college, the entire education process that you've been through. At the end of the semester, we ask questions, right? We want you to think and respond to those answers. We do not write sentences and give to you when we evaluate you, right? So this is also a wonderful way of understanding in case someone comes to you with an argument, right? And the person is not willing to listen to your opinions at all, right? So he is saying that, see, I was right, right? We should have done it this way, things like that. An argument goes on like that. A person, he is very close-minded. He's not listening to what you're saying. And if you go on defending, saying that, no, I was right, I'm superior to you, you should listen to me. These are all statements, right? Instead of that, you can ask them, what do you think we should have done differently, right? So when you post a question, the close-minded person is starting to open up. So a statement closes the mind, a question opens the mind. Fundamental principle of how thoughts work, right? So there are two modes of thinking. One is a divergent thinking, one is a convergent thinking. So if you look at the example on the left, where a question is posed. So when a question is posed, you can see that a student or anyone for that matter working in an industry, there are a lot of ideas that are coming up in the person's mind. Right? So he is starting to use his imagination. So this we call as a horizontal thinking. Right? You're broadly thinking into what are the possible solutions for a particular problem that has come because of question was actually posted to that person. All right. So in case a solution is posted, right? If a solution, for example, is a statement, right? So if a solution is posted, right, you can see that all the facts that he has learned before, right? The laws of gravity, right? Newton's law, all those are applicable. Basic fundamental laws of physics are all applicable to various solutions that we provide, and all those facts come in place, and then they make sense to you, right? So it is not saying that once an answer is provided, because that is what we do in class, right? So we teach you, and when we teach you, we give you different. It is not always a question. So there are different facts that we try to correlate to what you have learned in the previous semester. We try and correlate those facts. We try and teach you a technology, and we tell you this is how they are doing in the industry. So those are statements, right? So that becomes a vertical thinking, right? So when you talk about a vertical thinking, you're learning about technology so much in depth. When you are posted questions, horizontal thinking, you broaden up. You think in a very broader spectrum. So when you talk about when people say thinking outside the box and these terms, they are actually kind of using both these way of thinking. Okay. So very fundamentally, it is interesting to understand how we think, right? As a person, how do we think? As a student, how do we think? What is the process that is actually happening here? Now, if you look at very famous people, so like I said, this is not a new concept. It didn't just come out of nowhere. There are a lot of people who, over time, have been trying to understand what thinking is, how does thoughts work, how can we redirect our thoughts, right? So there is a lot of huge industries working in this area to control our thoughts. So and any company that has a marketing division, the marketing division's job is to redirect your thought into that particular product, right? So this is happening everywhere. You work on, you use Instagram, Facebook. They are trying to hold your attention. They are trying to hold your thought so that you would actually, and they're trying to feed in more uh, stuff that is relevant to you so that you will actually stay engaged in the particular app for a longer time. So thinking or controlling your thoughts is actually happening all around you. So it is very important to understand that this is again not a new concept. You have to understand where this has come from. All right. So when you should take great philosophers of older time, Socrates, for example, when a lot of people used to approach him for solutions, when they come and talk to him, generally when they post him a question, he will post them two questions back. So he will say that, I mean, he will make them think. He will not give them a solution right away, right? And most of the time he will say that I do not have a solution, right? So he is not there to say that I am, I am God, I have all the answers. No. So he was a thinker, he was a philosopher of that time. And when a person comes to a question, he will post five relevant questions to that person's problem. So the person is actually going away, and more people keep coming to it. The person is actually going away having thought of the problem in a much better way, right? So that is why he was very famous at this time. It is not because he was actually helping people with solutions. So that is very important. That a person can actually make you think. This is an this is from an external perspective. So thinking can be from an external. When a teacher comes into your class and he or she makes you think, right? This is because of that particular person. So this is we are talking about your thoughts, but this is because of a external force. Socrates is an example for that, right? And maybe his student Plato after that, his definition of what thinking is, he said when the mind is talking to itself, the mind is thinking when it is talking to itself. So it is he is trying to define thinking as a very personal experience, something that is only to you. So everyone sitting in the session, in case you are following what I'm saying, it is very clear that whatever your thoughts are very personal to you. No one else knows it, right? So this is a very private conversation that is happening with you and your soul, right? Uh, so thinking is defined two ways so far. So Socrates said that it can be by an external person can influence your thinking. You by yourself, you are sitting with your thoughts, right? So this is another example. And ways to gain clarity or to improve your thinking. There are more very recent professors, philosophers who are working in different concepts and ideologies. So, for example, Jordan Peterson, if you follow different professors and works that happens across the world, people who are so passionate about teaching or different areas of how students understand things or thoughts, how it generally happens, you would have definitely come across this particular professor. So the way that so he says thinking is not uh, there is so much that you can achieve by simply writing down your thoughts and thinking about it. So in his elaborate interviews and his talks, he will correlate the process of thinking to writing, and he will say that the entire education system has you are assigned a lot of work assignments, observations, a record you have to write. For exams we ask you to write in descriptive ways, and the reason we do that is because that structures your thinking. So a lot of students will say, see, this I can just print it out, right? It can be done. See, there is that is a short time solution, but what is the purpose of actually asking you to write when an assignment is given? It is because we want you to think, right? So in case that particular assignment, the activity of thinking is not happening, then you can print it out, right? So something like that. So he correlates thinking with writing, and the more you write, the more you can think clearly, right? Another aspect of thinking that he puts forward is that in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. So which means that now thinking is not uh, only about someone externally influencing you, or it is not only about your personal thoughts, or it is not a skill that you develop by writing. It is also structured by the way you express yourself in groups. So imagine you're sitting in a group of 6 people, for example, and 5 people have agreed with one conclusion that the leader of the group has come to, but you have a contradicting opinion, right? So there is a very polite way as to how you can actually put it forward and help the group understand your perspective of that particular problem. So what tends to happen in case you are like, no, my friends will feel bad. I do not want to offend them. 5 of them have agreed. Why should I speak? Right? If you do that and you silence yourself, the group will go on. But what tends to happen is your thought process, slowly your ability to think or think on your own or express is all going to start to deteriorate. Right? So over time, you are not going to be very strong in expressing your thoughts and even having your own thoughts. You will always go with the group. So 5 people said something, so I will take that. Right. So in order to be able to think, you have to risk being offensive. So this is all very, very basic fundamental philosophies of thinking. All these things are actually happening in a mind, be it a student or a faculty. Right. So if you look at great leaders, I mean, both from a negative perspective and from a positive perspective, you can see that someone as uh, I mean, from a negative perspective, you can see what Adolf Hitler would was had actually said. So he says, "How fortunate for leaders that men do not think." All right. So people who do not think on their own, whatever agenda I have, I can simply ask them to do it. Right. So if you have a followers of people who do not think, you can steer them in any particular direction. All right. You can see how disastrous this can be if you have a huge army and you lead them in a direction which is inhuman. You can understand the consequence of uh, those individual men not thinking on their own, right? So a leader can be a good leader or a bad leader. So that was an example of a bad leader. Um, but if you look at what Dr. Abdul Kalam said, he said thinking is progress. Every time you think, you individually are making progress. So non-thinking is actually stagnation of an individual, and hence an organization and the entire country. So Abdul Kalam envisions that people actually think on their own. He wanted everyone to think. He wanted everyone to dream, have a big vision, and he wanted people to have their own thoughts, have their own creativity, right, and move forward in life. So thinking leads to action. So you look at a lot of things happening in the society that you think are wrong, but just because you do not have your own thoughts, you have learned to not respond. You do not want to be offensive when you are expressing your thoughts. You have slowly decided not to think on your own. You go with the flow. And people who go with the flow and do not think can actually be controlled by a person who does not have a good vision as well, right? So you can see the example on the left and right. So you can see over time how thoughts are very important and how great people have actually their perspective of thoughts, how they have expressed, right? So Aristotle also said, be a free thinker. Don't accept everything as you hear as truth. So be critical and evaluate. So do not just take it up as face value. You'll have to question and understand if what is presented to you is right or wrong, right? So these, as you can see, this uh, before we get into design thinking, you can see that a lot of people have been trying to focus on what thinking actually is and try and understand if our thoughts are influenced by others or did we take it on our own, right? And Socrates again has said to find yourself, think for yourself. All right. So why are we talking so much about thinking? Why is it so important that we talk about design thinking or critical thinking? The entire reason why we're talking about this in an education institute or in an industry where it is required, it is just because uh, we are trying to innovate certain areas of technology, right? So, for example, if you look at what Abdul Kalam had said, so creativity is seeing the same thing but thinking differently. All right. So everyone have their own thoughts. When I asked, is sky the limit? You can see that 60 people had 60 different thoughts, right, in the classroom. And those thoughts have to progress with age, right? People should have their independent thoughts, and you can see how great leaders wanted you to be thinkers. All right, and these thinking will actually lead to creativity. Creativity is what we talk about as innovation, be it in an educational institute or be it in a industry, and that is why different forms of thinking, creative thinking process like design thinking has come into play. So when you look about thinking and education, what generally tends to happen is that, for example, Ken Robinson. So he's a professor who has worked so much on education and reforms of education. He has written a lot of books as well. And one thing that the professor Ken Robinson felt is that in the education system, there are things that we could actually do better, right? So he felt that in education, what certain challenges that we are facing are that students who are actually creative when they come in educational institutes, be it in schools or be it in colleges, any courses, whatever courses they take, somewhere along the way, the students are not actually thinking on their own by the time they finish the course. When they entered the course, when you look at a kindergarten school, you look at kids, they all want to express something, they want to say something out. But by the time they come out of these institutes, something has gone wrong. That is what he had felt. Right? And one of the ways he looks at education and the process of thinking is more from the perspective of an organic farming. So in an organic farming, when a child, for an example, a plant sapling here, right? A child grows, the growth is actually natural, right? Uh, I mean, there is nothing a teacher can do, or in this case, a farmer can do that can actually encourage, that can actually make that plant grow. So it has not grown today. Can I pull it? I cannot, right? There is nothing. There is intelligence within that plant itself or within that seed itself, right? The only thing that the farmer does is to take care of the soil that is around it, right? So there are certain conditions where thinking happens. There are certain conditions where innovation happens, and that is what, as an educationalist or be it an industry or anyone who is actually managing a team, will have to focus on because intelligence and creative thinking is there within each of us. All right, the tendency to think uniquely is also there within each of us, right? So this is what is happening, and certain innovations that are happening here. Uh, I'm again trying to relate to a student, and so that is why I'm trying to touch upon certain very basic concepts. What your particular teacher, so any institute that has gone for MBA and is actually looking into this process of outcome-based education, you will see that all the teachers are actually, there are certain innovations that are happening in education as well, and there are certain templates with which your teachers also work on. So whenever the committee comes, it is also very important that you understand what is happening, right? So there are different levels of how we want a student to think. All right. So if we ask you a question, what is Ohm's law? For example, you're from electrical electronics background. We ask you what is Ohm's law. We want you to remember, right? We want you to know if you have actually learned it enough that it is actually in your memory. So we are trying to recall a certain information from your mind, right? So there are certain questions that we'll ask you on a remembering level. Sometimes we will ask you, right? So this is the value of the battery. So this is the value of the resistance. We are asking you what is the current, or we are applying it in a certain application. We are trying to see if you are able to, if you have understood what Ohm's law is and what are the limitations of it. So when we ask you, there is a way when you respond that we actually can understand if you have just by hearted what it is, or if I just twist you and ask you a little, can you actually, when you say V equal to IR, if I ask you what I is, if you can actually maybe explain it, right, with much clarity, it means that you have understood the concept, right? But if I ask you further to actually measure what current is in a particular circuit, right, and if you are going to work out, maybe you're using a multimeter, or you're actually, once you have got the values, you're putting them in formulas and you're trying to figure out what is the current that is flowing through it, that means that you have started to apply it, right? So these are different levels of thinking that your teachers are actually pushing you towards. So it is very important to understand that this is also happening. And further, there are when you go into labs, you always apply. So basically, you apply, then you. So unless you have the lower levels, you cannot go to the higher levels as well. So you apply. There are different analysis that you'll have to do. You'll have to evaluate. When you do your projects, you will do them in much more detail, where you'll have to set out a budget to buy out different components. You have to understand what is the point of making a costly product, right? So there are a lot of evaluation and analysis that happens, and then it goes further into innovating a particular product. So there are a lot of competitions where a lot of you students will also win in these kind of competitions, where you innovate and you create something new, right? So this is what is also happening to you as a student. So when you get the question paper next time, kindly look at it. You will actually have questions which are structured based on this. Your teachers would have actually already told this to you. So what we have covered so far is the thoughts that you have when you're sitting in class, when a teacher walks and asks you two questions, right? One was a statement, one was a question. We saw what happened to your thoughts. We understood that thinking is not something that is new. Traditionally, different people have been understanding what thinking is. They have put forward different ideas that are happening. And you sitting in an educational institute, um, you are also the way your thought process works is what I'm trying to present here, right? So this is something that you can relate to, because this is how we've been, or any educational institute for that matter, has been trying to direct our students, or direct the thought process of our students, right? Sometimes what tends to happen, and those are certain challenges that we face, is that we always focus on results, right? So this can be with a lot of major companies, they fall because of this. A lot of even as a student, maybe in case, for example, I'll give an example with which you can relate. So an assignment is given to the class. If uh, if there are certain students who will actually try and work out the problem on their own. So based on the understanding, or based on what they learn from a book, they will come up with a solution. So if the solution is actually wrong, it is okay, right? But generally, what tends to happen is, if the focus is only on marks, what marks does the person get for assignment? All the students, what they tend to do is they will go and try and copy the assignments from a student who actually got the answer right. Okay. So this is one of the challenge, because there has to be a grading system, right? But what tends to happen is students will also look at it as a way. I need 10 marks for my assignment. What should I do, right? And that kind of drives your thinking, because evaluation is what speaks. What is the CGPA that you get at the end of your 4 years of engineering, right? That is what speaks. Or what is the placement offer that you've got? I mean, other benefits as well, but the metric with which we evaluate. So when we say it is out of 10, if you want 10, there is a force that is pushing you towards just copying the answer, right? Because you want 10 marks. That is the so that is one challenge. But then there has to be an evaluation, and that is how things are structured. So it will depend on you how you want to take the thinking forward. So you can think that I will copy this and I'll post it, or I will try it on my own and I will post it. There are two ways with which you can actually take it forward. That thinking is totally in your hands. All right. So some things maybe that we can do differently in case someone gets the answer wrong. There is if there is originality of work, any teacher will actually appreciate you, right? So you try this out, they'll actually admire you. They'll come and sit next to you. They'll be like, okay, fine, you have tried this out, right? What was the challenge you faced? And then your learning goes on from there, right? So to be wrong is not something that should be stigmatized. When that tends to happen, people do not think of anything original. So this is a revolution that is happening in teaching as well. So your thought process, how it should be structured, how things are, how things have to be different, they are all well thought out. So there are a lot of people who have actually gone into understanding this. Right. Now coming into what design thinking is, just to give an overview before I move into how it has applied, where people have not applied it, uh, when it is applied, how it is useful, all that we will see over time. But just to understand a framework of what design thinking is, one second. Sir, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Sir?
It's audible.
Okay, okay. All right. So just looking at the structure of what design thinking is, you can see that there are 5 stages to how um, an idea revolves. All right. So generally, when there are a lot of industries who have been following design thinking for quite some years now, and it is not something that is restricted to the industry. So there are different groups anywhere where projects or product development happens, research happens. Teams work in these kind of a structure. So like you said, you can focus on intelligence or ideas cannot be forced out, like how a plant cannot just grow, right? What you can focus on is on the conditions in which these ideas actually flourish, right? So the first thing that you have to understand when you're trying to provide a solution, people start at different points, right? So that is quite a challenge. And people are good at certain things. Not everyone is good at everything. So that is something that has to be understood. So when you're working as a team, the first thing that you'll have to do when you're trying to build up a solution, you'll have to emphasize, all right? You'll have to empathize as to what the particular user needs. All right. So understand the user's need and problem. So this is the first and the most important stage. What tends to happen is a lot of people, they have a lot of technologies. There are a lot of things that they can innovate on, and they'll move on with that innovation because they're so good at it. They will keep doing it, and at the end of it, if it does not meet the need of a customer or it does not meet the need of a patient, for example, if it is a medical application, then there is no point. That technology is not going to sell. If the technology does not sell, that company is not going to generate revenue. If the company does not generate revenue, they cannot pay their employees. If they cannot pay the employees, the company is down, right? The employees are going to leave, and that is how the company is going to fall, right? So there are companies that have done that. There are companies that have innovated and adapted along the way as well. To empathize is to understand what the user or the client exactly requests, right? So generally, and as you can understand, if you look at the arrow marks and the circle, this is not a linear process, which means that it is not that you will go from left to right and the process ends with the testing. Generally, what happens is the user does not know 100% as to what exactly he or she wants, right? So there are a lot of things like that. If you look at I mean, those examples again come later, but maybe a mobile phone that you use, right? Or or anything that you are quite fascinated about. When you go to these kind of showrooms and you see the product, you will look at, okay, for example, just imagine there was a time when touch screen was not there, and then touch screen has had come, right? It was not specifically, said. Obviously, a user actually needed it, right? I didn't want to press the keypad every time. I wanted something that was much more simpler, or something that was much more light to use, right? Maybe buttons are broken in the previous models that I had. This was a need of a customer. A customer never thought that there can be a solution for that, but a company came forward with a touchscreen, right? And then the user sees it, and then the user understands that yes, this was a problem I had, and I was able to build a solution. Uh, that I was able to build a solution, and then the user understands that yes, I'm able to. I mean, I need this product. I need to buy it, right? So it is not always that the user knows 100% as to what is actually needed, but 70 to 80% he or she knows, and the problem is actually expressed. So the second step is going to be to define what exactly the problem is, and defining this very critically is one of the uh, core steps of this entire process. All right, you need to know what your problem is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve, right? So that has to come down as a one-line problem statement, right? What is the solution that what is the problem that I'm providing a solution for? Unless this is defined and it is left open-ended, anything that you do after that will all be scattered, right? So once you understand what is the need, you have to define it, you have to ideate. So this is a very important step, that you sit down as groups and you think of solutions. All right. So the solution can be anything. So I've been through some of these sessions with the industries that I've worked before. What we do is we have a huge, I mean, we have this whiteboard, and there is someone who actually, maybe the team lead or the MD of the company, will actually stand in front, and we think of some products. So some of the ideas that we used to think was, how can we a stent, for example, right? When there is a block, how can maybe instead of a stent, what else can we use, right? And so people come up with all crazy ideas. So the most important thing is, none of the ideas is actually said that no, that is not good. Let us not put it on the whiteboard. That is never done. All right. So every idea that sounds funny or sounds stupid as well, we write it on the board. All right. So it will be it is quite fun when you do it. You see around 30, 40 solutions keeps coming up, right? Because you are not restricting yourself. Your mind is being creative. You're just thinking what can be done. When you say it only, you know that it will not work out. So we do that, and that process is done without any hindrance from anyone. So that is the rule. No idea should be put down, right? And everyone should give some idea. Every idea is written on the board. Multiple ideas are written, right? Once that is done, they actually go through each idea, right? And when you go through each idea, you will see that possibly two ideas or three ideas, when put together, will be an excellent idea. And the two, three ideas would have come from two, three different people. When the first person said it, he sounded funny. So he just told what the idea is. He simply wrote it on the board. Everyone laughed and they left it. The third person, the fourth person said the idea, same thing happened. But finally, when you put together, when you see it on the whiteboard, it is written. Like what Peterson said, your thinking is much more clearer when it is written. So once you write it and you see it, you reevaluate. When you see it, you see the three, four ideas put together is a brilliant idea. It's a brilliant product that can actually be a excellent solution for the particular user. All right. So this is the process of design thinking, and that particular phase when you talk about ideate, right? What is very clear here, like how did we started off by understanding thinking is a very personal process, right? It can be influenced by others, like what Socrates said, or it is your personal thought, like what Plato said, or you can actually make it better by writing out your thoughts, right? Or by expressing yourself. You have to be offensive to actually put out your thoughts out there, so that you can grow your individual thinking. All that process or all that thinking was actually happening within one person's mind. What is very critical here is that this step of ideate, right? It is actually when a team sits together, and the idea or the innovation does not come from one mind, it comes between minds. All right. So when you talk about design thinking, the idea has not come from one person. If you come back and say that, okay, this company has come up with this wonderful product, who came up with the idea? No one will be able to tell, because I will say that I heard half of what she said, then I heard what he said, then he said that, then I suggested this. No one knows how the idea had come, because everyone had put together the idea. It's a team of 10. That idea had originated in between all those minds. All right. So this is a very important observation that you will see when you sit through this process. And this is why companies they invest in this process a lot, because a lot of solutions, a lot of excellent solutions have come up like that. Once the idea is finalized, it is very, very important to build a prototype right away, right? So if it is a software solution or a hardware solution, some form of a prototype has to be built. If it is not built, the idea is kept left open. People again think of other ideas. It is getting scattered. It is getting diluted. It is not coming to a concrete solution. The first thing to do is build a prototype. You can test the product and see, or in the prototype stage itself, you can go back to the user and ask, how is our solution that you have built? There are a lot of different solutions that you can get. The user can tell, my God, this is not what I asked. Why did you waste your time? It could be something like that, because your discussion went in some particular direction. But either ways, whatever input the user gives the second time, it is going to redefine your problem statement. It is going to redefine the ideas that you had already you had taken, but the choices of the ideas that you had actually listed out, that can be taken again, and a prototype can be restructured, right? And then it gets into the testing phase, and this is how solutions are actually built, right? So this is nowhere a linear chart. Like I said, if you look at the arrow marks, they're circulating front and back. From any stage to any stage, this process can go back and forth, and it has to go back and forth uh, for it to be very efficient, or for it to be excellent. Right? When you think about creative thinking and critical thinking, I've said this. So pose questions. So when it comes to questions is where ideas generally generate. But when you talk about creative thinking, you're thinking about generating ideas. If you look at the third point, it's to brainstorm a solution. When I said to ideate, I said you are actually brainstorming. You're sitting with people to actually come up with any type of a solution when it comes to creative thinking. When you're thinking of critical thinking, you're getting critical with every idea. Is this right? If you look at the third point in critical thinking, identify the pros and cons. Is this a good idea? Is this a bad idea? Right? Should we keep it? Should we lose it? So that is where critical thinking comes in. Right? So you need a very broad thinking where you generate ideas. Then you need a critical thinking process where you judge the ideas, because you need to narrow down to a solution. So if you look at the thinking in the industry, right? Now I am splitting this into section: thinking in schools, design thinking, and thinking in the industry. It is just for the sake of presentation, but as such, design thinking is not something that has to be in the industry, or a thinking in the industry cannot be in the education institute. It's not like that, but it is just to present it so that you can actually try and see a distinction. And design thinking can be used in any platform or any group that is used. So just to understand the different types of industries, because why I'm trying to draw this particular slide, or what the point that I'm trying to draw on this particular slide, as an individual student, I said your thought process is going to be based on the marks. I said assignment 10 marks, you're focusing on two parts. I can actually think a solution, or I can think of copying and writing, right? So these are the two parts I'm taking, because my thought process is focused on the marks, right? That is your end goal. You want your good CGPA for the 4 years of education that you get. Now, that is one process. I want you to keep that in mind. When you look at an industry, right? Uh, what are the aspects that they are looking into? What actually determines success? For you, your CGPA determines success in an education institute, and in industry, what determines success? So very broadly, just to classify different types of industries, this is one wonderful chart that was actually spoken by a speaker by the name Guy Kawasaki. He was a software evangelist in Apple. In one of the talks, it is on YouTube. It's called The Art of the Start, and this is a wonderful slide where he has put together a lot of information. So very quickly, if you look at it, on the x-axis, you have value to customer. A particular product can be of good value to the customer if the value is high. I mean, on the x-axis, right? If it is higher, it means the value is high. If it is towards zero, it means the value is low to the customer. On the y-axis, you have the ability to provide unique product or service. All right. So if your particular company has a particular technology that you're the only person who can actually build it, right? The You will have a very high value on the y-axis. right? If it is a solution that anyone can build, right, it will be close to zero. So every industry is somewhere within this two-dimensional graph. All right. So first, let's look at a company which has a very high value, but the ability to provide a unique product or service is actually low, which means that the value to the customer is very high, right? But anyone can actually build this product, right? So what will happen is you are always going to compete for prices, which means that people are going to buy a product, but there are a lot of people who can actually build the same product. So you're going to have a lot of competition, right? And every time that someone lowers the price, he says that there is a discount in my company, you will have to compete with that because the market is going to move towards him, right? So you're going to compete for prices if the value is high and the ability to provide a unique solution is low. The value also can be low and the ability to provide a unique solution also can be low. There are a lot of companies that run totally on the internet. They do not have a huge investment cost or they do not have to take property for rental. They do not need to meet people like that. So the .com is generally any business that runs on the website. So a lot of people, anyone can actually start the next company with a similar product. So that is an area that no company has to be. But there are a lot of companies who are there, they make a little money, they find revenues from other areas, right? So you can see there are two different, entirely different types of companies. Then there is a company that has no value to customer. That product has no value, but you're the only person who can actually build that product, and that is just stupid. So there's a lot of companies who are actually out there. They're making products that is never going to sell. No one wants it, right? So that is another category of companies that we put it on the top list. The part where it is marked as X, so that is where the value to the customer is maximum, and your ability to provide that service is unique, right? So you're the only person who can actually build the technology and the value to the customer is maximum. All right. So that is the part that is marked X is the industries that are thriving. So as a student, focusing on CGPA, high CGPA, industry, you're focusing on the top right corner. Those are the industries that are actually doing well, who can actually provide a high value to the customer and the ability to provide a unique service or solution. All right. So generally, when you look at this process, right, of solving, you can see that initial phases where you actually get inputs from the user. There's a problem sensing and a definition phase. There is a phase where you're incubating ideas, and here different opinions are shared. So all this is kept broad open. All right. So there is a divergence at the beginning, certain catalyzing further ideas. There's a lot of people who actually put different ideas that can actually move the idea forward, right? And front and back, this process goes. All right. Then there are certain, then you kind of start to narrow down. All right. So, like I said, on the whiteboard, you have 50 solutions. Now you have to narrow it down, right? So, your critical thinking process starts and you're trying to evaluate the pros and the cons. And then you're challenging different assumptions that you had already made. You're defining what options you have. Then you're starting to take a decision. And once the decision is made, you're you're mobilizing for action. And once you mobilize for action, which means that you're building a prototype, then you're getting into testing and you're going to review, which means review is coming back to the user again. So there is a divergence process and there is a convergence process as well again. Just one second. Okay. Now, like I said, this was a chart that we had seen initially, and the reason why I'm putting it into the thinking of what happens in industry is because as students we are actually making you think at different levels. Faculties are actually making you think at different levels, and you have to understand that industries are actually at different levels as well. All right. For example, remembering. So memory is actually a very basic necessity for anyone who has to have his own thought. Right? So remembering is a very basic level. Understanding, for example, if you understand the banking sector, right, or you understand the railway sector, or you understand a particular type of a business, you have an understanding of that business. You can actually find clerical roles. You can find small roles, and that is where you will actually get placed. If your level of thinking is only on an understanding level. All right. We move further and you actually tend to apply concepts. You are someone who can actually take up these technologies and you can start applying it in certain areas. All right. So there are going to be a lot of service-based companies which are actually going to hire you. They're going to say that, okay, this person has understood the technology. For my requirement, he can actually apply it. Right. And if there is, when you move to higher levels, you can actually analyze, you can evaluate. You are evaluating different risk factors. You're saying that this particular technology does not have this particular provision to it, which means that maybe there is a cybersecurity attack to it, or if it is a hardware product, risk factors are accordingly. Maybe there's a power spike that can come. So there are different based on the quality of products that you have used and things like that. If you've done a very good project, you would have actually come up to these levels. You can move into industries of that level for actually developing products who are working on risk analysis and these areas. And as you can see, they are actually paid more. Or if you're someone who has actually built prototypes, you have actually built your own product, you can actually start your own company. You go into create level and you become an entrepreneur. So I'm trying to correlate to the thinking process that happens in education, the thinking process that happens in industry, and the way uh, college education is actually making you think from an educational institute towards a industrial perspective. So this thought process is also growing on one side. So critical thinking, or if you talk about design thinking, where does all these ideas come from? It comes only if you are able to think on your own. All right. So to think on your own, you have to try and respond to these questions when they are asked to you. So they can be on any level and progressively, first semester, second semester, third, fourth, and fifth. Your teachers are going to move you from remember level to understand level, try and move you to apply level. They want you to apply. They want you to analyze. They start moving you towards that level, and a project is where you are going to maybe put all the ideas together and build a prototype. All right. So based on that, you're going to find yourself a position in an industry, and accordingly, the thought process in an industry is also structured like that. So when you're sitting with a design engineering, a design thinking team, for example, these ideas are actually going to come to your mind because you're able to think on your own. Right? If you look at some products, some companies that actually did not innovate. All right. So maybe quickly we'll just go through that. If you look at the first digital camera, Kodak was a huge, huge company. They were like the only people. When they came, you have to keep in mind that till then, like uh, people just moved through time. So you were young, you grew old, just went on like that. There was no like other than written information. When you talk about images, there were no particular forms of having an actually image of a person or a memory of a time. So there were paintings people used to draw on caves, on different types of papers and all. But when it comes to actually having an image, this was where it all started. So when Kodak came, it was a huge, huge revolution, 1975, and you can see the early models that they had, right? But what happened, if you look, Kodak had a very linear growth, right? So by 1996, the market capitalization was 28 billion. It had an employee of 1,40,000, right? So this was a huge, huge, huge company at that time. But by 2012, if you saw, what happened is the company totally went into bankruptcy. All right. Why? Because again, this is Kodak failed to innovate. All right. So when a lot of technologies came, they still focused on their analog, all the older technologies of film. When products actually moved into the digital technologies, Kodak failed to adapt. All right. So they ran into bankruptcy, or they had to lose out all their employees. Now no one uses films, right? We do not get into it. There are certain enthusiasts who actually wants those kind of a old type of a camera, and maybe they use it, but otherwise for a regular use, no one does. And it is even coming to your mobile phones, right? That is where when you buy a phone, the almost the camera setting is what you actually look for, because every phone can make phone calls. So you can see how technology had changed, and Kodak, who was one of the leading company, failed to innovate at that time, and that is why they fell off. Right. So this is a company that actually failed. Nokia, right? The product Nokia, most of us, at least faculty could relate. So all the phones that we had initially, we had these Nokia phones. They're very durable. The battery life, they used to stay, I don't know, for days. We never had to think of charging our phone, right? And but slowly over time, Nokia did not innovate in their product designs while other companies actually started doing it. So they had to sell themselves to themselves to Microsoft now. So you have Lumia and other versions now that comes with Microsoft OS and all that, right? So Motorola went through the same thing. They were growing a good business, but then they had to sell them themselves to Google. I think it was 12 points, 12, more than 12 billion, I think, and then it was sold to Lenovo. All these companies, they failed to innovate and grow their business. So BlackBerry one time was something like what you have Apple phones now, right? It was all the business people had it. It was that kind of a trend setting, but they again failed to innovate in their products and the designs. All right, so they had to permanently close. Right. So what is true is that if you look at people who survive or businesses who survive, right, they are not the people who are actually always just the best. So Kodak was the best, right? Nokia was the best at that time. But when the market is changing, if you are not going to adapt to that change, you will not survive. All right. So this is a very fundamental Charles Darwin's theorem, survival of the fittest concept. And all these industries, they fail to survive because they fail to innovate. All right. If you look at an excellent book by Roger Martin on the design of business, right? The way he puts it, right? He says that there are certain areas that you are trying to explore further, right? If you look at this particular image, you can see that the section on top is called a mystery, and it is widening out, which means that there are a lot of things we do not know. There are a lot of things we have to explore. There are a lot of things we do not. When we start the process, we do not know that this is the solution that we are going to get, or this is what we call as the R&D division of any company, right? So that is where a lot of creativity happens. There is a lot that is where a lot of innovative happens. That is where all these analyze apply students actually get placed. They get into these roles, right? And then that is, I mean, that is what is going to move the company forward. If Kodak had a good division here in their company, a good R&D division, they would have not failed, right? So they failed to see that. They focused on the lower spectrum, and the lower spectrum, as you can see, it is narrowing down, it's tapering down. So heuristic is where there are processes that you know that these are the outcomes that can possibly come, right? It is still within your understanding. You know you can invest in that process 100% because you're going to get some form of a solution, and people go with that. And lower down the chain, if you come, there are certain algorithms, basic processes that the company has to do, which they hire people who has understanding of the domain and who can just apply. So they work on a very uh, what do you say a very like a conveyor belt kind of a process. So they day in and day out, this is a process they have to do. There are certain algorithms you have to do this, and they have to keep on going like that just to keep the base of the company functioning. And below that, there are a lot of areas where people work with, where they just can't remember things. They are not very strong basic understanding they have. These people actually get exploited at different companies. Not exploited in the sense like not not the most creative jobs, the jobs that actually generally you feel exhausted at the end of the day. There are anything and everything that the company needs you'll have to do. That comes much lower down the company, and it comes to your thinking as well, right? So there is a direction when you have to innovate, right? So innovation is also going to be there, but it is also important that you come back to your process and keep your process in line. All right, you cannot simply innovate without having a foundation of the technology within your company. So to go back and forth, to go into innovation and to evaluate what is your efficiency is very, very critical for a company to grow. And this process that is highlighted in this particular book uh, has actually brought down the expenditure of a company in a huge way. All right. So this is one kind of a business model that they follow, where thinking and creativity and innovation is actually on top of the company, and it is very, very important that you have it. If you do not have it, you have seen examples of companies that have failed. It is also important that we focus on the efficiency of the products and the services that we build. All right. So there are different aspects to that business which you will see in the later slide, but that it is important that we go back and forth along this path. All right. So when it comes to innovation, generally it's just a hunch. So people just have an idea. Maybe this is something that we can try, right? So companies that actually encourage that idea and fund it and say that there is a history of you are capable of doing research. Please proceed with this. We will fund you. All right. If it is an excellent product, we will be better than the competitive companies. So that's a hunch. It just goes on with that. And for you to build the necessary technologies and for the lower level of employees to actually establish the technology in your company, it has to be presented in a simplified fashion, right? So it has to be simplified for for a manager or for someone or a TL on a lower level to actually try and get his team to actually build that particular solution, right? So this is an excellent summary of how businesses are trying to use this concepts of learning, use this concept of innovation, um, and actually try and improve the efficiency of their functionality. So, like I said, there is exploration on the top and there is exploitation at the bottom. If you look at different areas, organizational focus, you look at when the organization is trying to focus from an exploration perspective, they are actually it is focusing on the invention of businesses. You are actually building new products, and that is what Apple does that every time, right? So there are a lot of products that they keep launching, and that is what is pushing the company forward, right? When it comes to lower levels, it's more of the administration of the business, where people will have to just clock in and clock out. There are certain works that they have to get done, and unless that is done, the company is not going to stand. That is going to be there, right? But like I said, the reason why I still brought up the Bloom's taxonomy, the hierarchy of learning and the hierarchy of thinking, is so that you have to try and move to these high levels. Always, maybe you will start at the bottom, but you'll have to grow to the high level. You'll understand that if your level is thinking and you do not change, you do not improve your thinking, you will actually end up in these levels where you're going to find your job very exhausting. Although, so this is an organizational focus. There's a overriding goal, driving force, future oriented. You can see that the exploration people are very long term. Exploitation, there are short terms. There are some challenges you have to meet for the particular day, and that is what you focus on. All right. Risk and reward. I'm just skipping through some. Maybe you can read through them. Risk and reward, for example, high risk exploration. You are investing so much in R&D in the company. That is a high risk, right? Because if it fails, a huge amount of money is gone, right? When you have to pay employees at different levels, investing in R&D, you have to have that kind of a revenue generation before you actually get into that model. So there is a high risk, but the potential of high reward is it's very high, right? If you are only going to focus on the lower level, the risk is very minimal, but you cannot expect because you are not focusing on developing new products. There is not going to be you cannot expect a great reward at all, right? So certain challenges, like I said, see exhaustion and these difficulties, right, are what people will face when they're at much lower levels of the hierarchy. Right? Now, there was a particular survey that Accenture had done where they asked what determines the long-term success of a company, and a lot of people said that executives said that it is dependent on the ability to innovate. 93% of them said that. A lot of them said that in the next 5 years we have to transform our business, right? Senior executives they said these are the top three priorities. So the huge people who actually acknowledge that a huge change is required for innovation to happen in the industry. But innovation is it is mandatory. So like I said, companies that did not innovate, they failed. But it requires it is not that easy, right? So it calls for more people to be more innovative more often. All right. So more people have to be critical thinkers. More people will have to think on their own. When they come into these sessions of design thinking, they have to come up with greater ideas, right? Sometimes a fresher can come up with a better idea than someone who's actually been thinking of a particular problem for a very long time. So there are a lot of so what drives innovation becomes quite a challenge, and it is not always not always very clear. So from an educational perspective, that is why I'm saying you'll have to improve your level of thinking, that once you get into these industries, you are in the position of contributing toward design thinking process. Now, even though Ashner came up with that survey, finally, when they came to conclusions, executives were able to say that only 18% of what we have done had actually come out as a innovation strategy to the company, right? Uh, and, uh, and and uh, and innovation as such has had not grown to the way that they had expected. Right? So these are some challenges that they are facing. Okay. Now, when you look at design thinking, right? So anyone who actually has built a solution for a particular problem, because generally when people say design, we think of mechanical engineers or certain branches of engineering where They work on different tools to talk about design. Anyone who comes up with a solution that can change, the process of an existing situation is has actually designed a particular process to it. All right. If you look at few designs, I mean, these are certain examples or certain bad examples. If you look at it, if you look at the two products that are there, one is a cooking spray and one is to kill flies and insects. The problem with this company, it is both made by the same company, right? The problem with the companies, they are very similar looking products, right? And one can actually kill insects and one is actually used in the kitchen, right? So the design has to be drastically different. But users should actually know that the product is actually uh, uh, some. I mean, it should be very clear, at least in the color coding, that that the product that is used is harmful and one is good, right? So if that is not done, it is going to be hard. If you look at a roadway, for example, everyone has done the job. The person who has laid the road has done the job. The person who has set up the street lamp has done the job, but the lights are all tilting the wrong way, right? So there is no use of having this kind of a design, right? So here in both these solutions, what you see is that there was a person who built the road, right? He did that. There was a person who erected the lamp. The lamp is not falling down. He has done his job as well. But together as a team, did it actually benefit the user? It has not, right? So that is those are the conclusions. If you get into a lift and if you look at the button is placed like this, obviously you will actually struggle to know where to go. So this is a very poor design, right? Again, this can be a funny example. So generally, when one needs to use a washroom, we want to know if there is an occupant there or if it is available, right? So if you look at only that one problem and you build a solution, you can think of a glass door as a solution, right? So that problem has been solved, right? But that has raised more problems. Clearly, that has raised more problems. So this is what if an idea just comes from one person or particular team, or one person is actually trying to solve a particular problem without understanding the entire user's experience, uh, you will come up with solutions like this. So I'm showing very bland solutions so that you can actually correlate to much larger problems that you will actually face in industries. Now there is a ramp to actually take a child trolley up. But the person who designed the gate had actually covered that part. Right? So you see the teams have not worked together. The end user is affected in every aspect. If you look at all the products that I've shown, the end user, he's saying take the trolley up, he's not able to, the washroom is not usable, right? Anyone using any of these products are not going to use it. The end user has affected. If you go for a linear design, this is what is going to happen. And in design thinking, this is not what we encourage. So it comes back into an iterative process and the team together that sits and works on it. So here steps are built. The steps are built, that is fine. Someone came up with a pattern of this corduroy material or whatever, or carpet that they have done. But if you look at the pattern, you can see that it is very, very hard for the user, and someone who's elderly will find it very hard to walk down these steps, right? So these are all solutions, but they are not useful solutions for the user. You look at writing like this, you see what is intended as don't worry, be happy, right? But that is not the first thing that you will see. You will read it downwards, you see don't be happy, right? That is the first thing that you're going to see. So this is again a example of a poor design. You're trying to communicate something, but it has not reached the end user the way it is expected. A gate is designed, someone wanted to give a different design to the gate, the entire purpose of the gate is lost. Anyone can actually go down that hole, right? So this is giving partial solutions without actually you have built a prototype, you come to the end, right? And you have not come back to the user's requirement. Right? So if you go to an excellent design, a good design is actually a lot harder to notice than a poor design because a good design will fit our needs, right? Only when the design is very bad that we'll be able to see it. All right. So generally, if it satisfies our needs, we'll not be able to see it. So something that is designed very well will satisfy our need. We will not actually notice it. Right. That is what a good design is. Every example that I showed now are designs that you can actually see right away because you know that it is a bad design. Right. So that is a very fundamental law of differentiating between a good design and a bad design. Right? So all these companies have very heavily invested into design thinking. Their teams work day and night in this process to come up with different products, different solutions, try and get more of the market, right? Try to reach out to more people. This is what they do. And there are certain statistics as to showing which the companies that have adapted design thinking have done 200% percentage times higher than other companies that were in the stock market over time. So this is something the design-centric companies like Apple, Coca-Cola, Ford, IBM, Nike, all these companies have actually used design thinking. And from management institutes, based on survey, we can see that the companies are actually flourishing much more better because they actually have this process of design thinking very well embedded in the organization. Right. So this is the revenue growth that is there. Again, design thinking was ranked as the #1 trending business skill in 2019 in 7 out of the 10 industries. All right. So if you look at the automotive industry, they said that design thinking was the best business skill that we can have. Right. So there are other designs, business skills as well. So this was marked as #1. Being in automotive, consulting, consumer goods was fourth. So finance, right, manufacturing, media, technology, telecom, in all these industries, design thinking was rated as a topmost business skill that one can have. Right? Very shortly, just to formally maybe close the end of with an understanding of what happens here. There is a product that is desirable. You can think that you need it, right? And there is a feasibility of building the product. When you say feasibility, the product can be built. Can I actually do it or not, right? And then you have viability. Viability, which means that is this product going to generate revenue? All right. Is the company going to grow because of this? All right. So where these three ideas meet is where you're going to have a wow moment when it comes to these kind of a design thinking group process, right? So there's a desirability that this is good if it is there. There's a feasibility. Can we do it? Do we have the budget? Are we that scale for company to do it? The viability. Are we going to generate revenue out of this? And there is a point of intersection where that moment happens. So if you look at the technology, this is a much more a brilliant Venn diagram that will give an understanding. So if you look at technology, so there are different areas of technologies: artificial intelligence, augmented reality, robotics, automation, engineering. There are everything that happens here all comes under technology. So these are things that we are learning, right? Then there are businesses when it comes into accounting and finance, economic analysis, right? We have to understand the competition, how the market works, marketing operations, right? And the IT and other areas. That is the business side of the company. Then you have human values, so psychology. You need to know what the user particularly wants, right? Sociology, depending on where the person is from, right? So all this is actually human values. So there are three different components that has to be thought when the company is actually bringing out a product. So there's a technology area, there's a business side to it. Because if you do not have a business side, there is no sales, you're not generating money, the company will not grow. Then there's a human value. It has to be for a particular user, right? So there are certain, when it comes to design thinking, all these ideas are actually coming in place. And one that has a great idea is one that actually touches it on these three areas, right? So if you look at the diagonal arrow at the lower part, it is a combination of technology and human values, which means that technology and human. When you talk about it, is talking about design and interactivity. So human computer interface. When you're using a touch screen, for example, right, a brain computer interface, visual thinking, all this comes under how comfortable a person is using a particular technology. When you want to take money from the bank, right, it has come down to ATM. Now you can actually there are a lot of innovations that have actually come in that. So that is technology and human values, the progress that has happened. When it comes to human values and business, right, uh, you have the entire HR department which takes care of the HR has to take care of the growth of the business as well and recruit the right people. It is also about having the right policies for the employees of the organization as well, and the human values are actually kept intact. So the HR management team, leadership, organizational dynamics is totally taken care by what we call as this organizational behavior. Then there is a convergence of technology and business, where there are different manufacturing processes. Where see every technology cannot simply there are a lot of ways in which the factory process can actually be what do you say it can be made more efficient, right? So all that comes under the mix of technology and business. So how many times should we prototype it? Is that necessary? The manufacturing technology, the process, the chain management process, all that comes under manufacturing and services. So a lot of ideas put together when it comes up with a solution that sells. Now, as a student, I've been always throughout this talk, I've been trying to link it to the perspective of a student.
Generally, when we think of projects and then when we build solutions, generally we do not think of if my project will actually sell. Will someone actually buy my prototype? Right? Does it have that value? So generally we'll be like, okay, I know what is a microcontroller, I know the sensor, that looks like a problem, we'll do it. And generally it goes on like that, right? But that because we are coming from a technology background, we look at it like that. But when it comes to design thinking and building solutions, there are a lot of competitions which you go. And IAC used to conduct one competition, I think it was called MEDA before. There are a lot of competitions where you're put in teams. So there is a doctor, there's an engineer, there's a student, maybe there's a professor. They put you in different teams and they want you to come up with different solutions. There's a marketing person as well. So the marketing person has to sell whatever you make, right? So he's also going to give us input and tell you what will sell and what will not sell, right? So that is very very critical, and we never generally think about that when it comes to building a product. So that is where all this that is why it is very important to have this kind of a design thinking process. And like I said, innovation can come from your end, but when you talk about that ideate stage of design thinking, the idea is actually formed in a group, right? So that is what actually sells out as a product. Every company that has not done it has failed. Every company that has done it has actually survived and they are thriving currently. All right. So I hope you are able to relate as to why I actually spoke about the different sections of the topic. And if you see the initial phase, like I said, like the whiteboard that we had, it is a very rough phase. A lot of uncertainty, there are patterns, people have different insights, there's a lot of research. So once the prototype is built, so you come to the idea phase, you have narrowed it down, you build a prototype. Once the prototype is done, there's a lot of clarity, right? So the prototype has to be built, and once that comes, further with the help of the user, you can actually um, you can move towards innovating and having a final design and a final product. All right. So this is the same phases that we have seen before. So when you talk about design thinking, uh, uh, empathize is the process where you are actually close to the user. You are trying to understand the requirement of the user. You'll have to define or you'll have to make a clear problem statement as to what your product is actually going to do. Then the ideate or the brainstorming session is what I've been saying. And then you have to build a prototype. There is a testing phase to it. You'll have to check if there are certain guidelines that has to be followed, standard company guidelines that has to be followed, and it has to come back and forth while you're building a particular product. Now, this is one step beyond that. If you look at someone like Steve Jobs, the late founder of Apple, so he will say that I do not rely on market research. Now, this is a very shocking statement because any person who's into marketing will try and understand what people are buying. Very simple. Am I spending money? What am I spending money on? What are people buying? Those are the products that I have to build. But according to Steve Jobs, he says, this is not my approach. Our job is to figure out what they're going to want before they do. So, like I said, no one went to a company and said that I want a touch screen, right? We were using keypads. We thought that was working. We didn't have a problem. It could have been better, but obviously we never thought that we can have touch screens and all that. But then when touchscreen was presented to us, we were like, my God, this was a problem I didn't know I had. Right? I didn't know there could be a solution, so I didn't make a big deal about the problem. Right? So this is where people are, they one step ahead. The companies that have done extremely well, they market research is just one step. They go beyond that. Kodak had an excellent market research. They knew the technology was working well. People had memories. There's an emotional attachment to photos. So Kodak was doing extremely well. But when technology moved to the digital platform, and when technologies were already moving to the digital platform, Kodak had to innovate, but they did not, right? They relied on the market research. They're saying that people are buying. When people say that, I can take maybe 20, 30 photos in this film, people were using it. But someone came and said that you can take any number of pictures you want, right? It depends on the storage of your phone. When someone brings a solution like that, obviously the user is going to go in that direction. All right. So the company had presented an idea that was maybe 10, 100 times better than the technology that was being offered by Kodak. So you can see how companies have actually innovated over time. So these are a lot of programs. Harvard had a lot of materials when I was actually going through this. A lot of universities providing different programs on design thinking. And again, design thinking maybe from Jeff Bezos' perspective. He said there are two ways to extend a business. You can take an inventory of what is good and extend out, which means that you try and understand what the market wants and you give it. Sometimes you listen to what the market is actually looking for, right? So he says Kindle, because they were selling books for quite some time. So Kindle is something that people read on these kind of pads. They want to use these kind of some kind of a digital technology, but that does not affect their eyes. Right. So there were different products that come up, and Kindle was a product, or Kindle-based products that came after that. It was all by understanding what the customer needs, and that was kind of a backward learning process, right? Right. Steve Jobs also say that. So this is again a summary of that. So when you talk about creativity, who came up with that idea in your company? No one will be able to tell because a lot of people had worked together in actually building it, and everyone will actually feel guilty if I say that no, that was my individual idea at the end of a business meeting, right? It is not something that someone can actually say. He's definitely going to feel guilty because he can actually relate the idea that he had taken had actually come by putting a lot of ideas together because he was able to think critically, he was able to think creatively in a broader sense as well. But those are certain challenges. So those ideas are actually formed within groups. So design thinking, these are how different teams work. So I think they've moved beyond the idea phase and they're getting the prototype just to show a functional block of it, right? So I think by now you would have got a very clear idea of what these two differences are and how they are very crucial, right? So design thinking is going to help you on a much broader perspective. You're not shutting down any ideas. You're just bringing in your brainstorming. You're bringing a lot of ideas, and we have seen the 5 stages of the process. And there is always a process when when you put together different ideas, like the Venn diagrams, the business idea and this idea, and the technological idea, and the human user or the value idea. When they are all put together, there's a wow moment that happens, and that that is the solution that the company then takes forward, right? So then it comes to the critical thinking phase where you actually analyze the pros and cons. And even before that, once you ideate, when you're trying to eliminate the ideas that will not work, that is where you're using the process of critical thinking. Even in your education, like I said, across Bloom's taxonomy, after you apply, you're going to analyze and you're going to evaluate, and that is where your critical thinking is actually being nurtured while you're still in college. So if you look at design thinking in India, so I'll close with this. We are almost at the end of time. But if you look at one of the very old inventions that had come was Jaipur food. So people with amputation, right, diabetic patients, people who needed this, they had built products. It was not so there was just a walking stick, and people used to walk around like that. So this kind of gave back, some kind of a sense of wholeness to the patient. So this is understanding what the patient wants. It was not just a physical support. So a walking stick can actually help you, right? But the patient wanted something more than that, right? When you look down, he wants to see both his legs. It is quite a very traumatizing moment when you actually do not have one of your legs. It is very hard. So understanding more in-depth need of the user, the Jaipur foot was actually built. Again, we know Arvind Eye Hospital. Most of the tools that they had actually built for the patients for cataract surgery, for different surgery, they had actually built on their own. They were doing free camps for a very long time. It was not built out of generating money. It was more built for so a lot of innovation happened there. So these people had to innovate, and when people came in huge numbers, managing them, all that there was a lot of innovation that had happened. There's a huge number of cataract surgeries that happen uh, every day, right? And for a long time, they have built a very good history in this area. This is another product that was built by two students who were in Stanford. They came back, two Indians who have come back to India and have established this. So people from very poor financial backgrounds, when they have kids, infants in their hand, to have it maintain the kid a little warm, right? It is not a luxury that everyone can have, right? So there were so this product actually helped a lot of people, a lot of families who live out in the streets who do not have sufficient accommodation facilities and things like that, where they can actually bring up the child well. This product was understanding the need of the market and actually building a solution around it, right? So just to summarize what we had gone through. So the first I started off by trying to relate how your thoughts are actually controlled by a statement or by a question, right? And thinking is a process that has happened for a long time. There are a lot of philosophers who have put up different understandings of what happens in a person's, in an individual's thinking process. The thinking process that happens in an education through what drives your thinking process is what I had presented from a faculty perspective, from a student perspective, right? Again, thinking from an industry perspective, trying to understand that that here, while you focus on marks and CGPA, there it is a different requirement altogether, right? A product has to sell at the end of the day. There has to be a business model to it, and why certain industries fail, and why certain industries succeeded, right? And what were the differences that they had made, and then we have seen the design thinking process of total what is critical thinking, right? And how this process works, and few case studies. The 3 case studies that we have seen of the year. So I hope the session has been useful. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for sir for offering us a session on design thinking.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, if students and faculty members, if you have any queries, please ask. Meanwhile, I will share the feedback form in the chat box. I have pasted the Google form link for faculty members, feedback form link for the faculty members. Faculties can fill the feedback now.